Part 56. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiaorong. Chapter 552. Remember it in 1 second and read wonderful novels for free without pop-ups. In the Imperial study room, the atmosphere was extremely solemn. The serving young eunuch lowered his head and said nothing, even the sound of his breathing was deliberately suppressed. This was mainly because His Majesty's face was gloomy, and any abnormal noise at this moment might be a precursor to His Majesty's anger. I don't know how long it took before a young eunuch came in from outside the palace and said cautiously, "Your Majesty, Lord Tang is here." Emperor Chen's expression softened slightly and he said, "Xian." Tang Ning walked into the main hall, actually feeling a little nervous. The sharp blade defeated Chen Wang's shadow guard. Although he didn't say it on the surface, he would definitely feel uncomfortable in his heart. He might find an opportunity to torment him and regain the lost face. He was mentally prepared for this. But even though he was mentally prepared, he didn't expect that his revenge would come so quickly. He had just returned home, and before his chair was warm, he was summoned to the palace again. "I see your Majesty." He walked to the palace, cupped his hands, and asked, "I wonder what your Majesty's orders are." Emperor Chen looked at him and said, "I have an errand for you to do." Tang Ning did not speak, waiting for Chen Huang to continue, but she was already sighing secretly in her heart. Judging from Chen Huang's serious expression, this must not be a good thing. Chen Huang stood up, walked down from above, and said, "I want you to go to Jiangnan." Even though Tang Ning knew that Chen Huang would avenge the shadow guard, she never expected that he would be so ruthless and send him directly to Jiangnan. There was no such thing as losing if he couldn't afford it. Although Jiangnan was prosperous, his home was in the capital, and he didn't want to go to a place he was unfamiliar with. Tang Ning looked troubled, looked at Emperor Chen, and said, "Your Majesty, I just got married not long ago, this Jiangnan." Chen Huang said, "There is some trouble in Jiangnan. I want to find a capable and trustworthy person to solve it. After thinking about it, I think there is no one more suitable than you." Only then did Tang Ning understand that it turned out that this trip to Jiangnan was not a dispatch, but just an errand, which would delay him for a few months at most. Although he was still unwilling to bother, looking at Chen Wang's expression, it was clear that the chaos in Jiangnan was not small, and he was most likely to do this errand. There is no way to avoid it. Since I can't resist, I can only accept it. Fortunately, the place I want to go to is Jiangnan and not other places. It just happens that I can take my mother to see it, and then visit Suhuhu by the way, and give her a good night's sleep for free. It is all regarded as a public trip. Plus visiting relatives. Traveling through most of Chen country to sleep with her, Suhuxu will definitely be very moved when he sees him, right? After thinking about it for a while, Tang Ning looked at Chen Huang and asked, "I wonder what happened in Jiangnan." Emperor Chen said with a gloomy face, "There are thieves in Hezhou, Runzhou and several other states who are causing trouble, inciting the people, and plotting evil. You should take people to go and have a look. If you encounter any rebels and traitors, you will kill them without mercy." Tang Ning finally understood why Chen Huang was so angry. From ancient times to the present, the most unbearable thing for emperors is rebellion. Rebellion is also the biggest crime at present. The 9 clans are implicated and will not be pardoned. As long as the rebels only spark a spark, the court will extinguish them at all costs. Regarding this matter, Chen Wang's reaction was quite calm. If the rebellion was in the north instead of south of the Yangtze River, he might have been unable to sit still and summoned his ministers to discuss countermeasures. Even if the south really rebels on a large scale, as long as the imperial court gathers its troops and marches south, it will be unstoppable all the way. But the north is different. The terrain is complex, food is insufficient, and the fighting power of the rebels is not of the same level. It may not be possible to win a few battles. No one in the world is named Zhao anymore. He looked at Emperor Chen, cupped his hands, and said, "I obey your order." Chen Huang thought for a while and said, "To avoid alarming the enemy, you are going as the Deputy Minister of the Ministry of Civil Affairs. It is called to evaluate local officials in Jiangnan, but in fact it is to investigate this matter. I will give you a token, and you can move places at will the defenders. In addition, you should also take the 100 men with you. Rebellion is indeed something that the emperor cannot bear. Even if there is only the slightest hint of rebellion, he will completely eliminate it." Emperor Chen explained to Tang Ning for a full quarter of an hour. After he finished speaking, Gong Sun Ying, who was still kneeling in the palace, raised his head and suddenly said, "Your Majesty, I am willing to go to Jiangnan with General Tang to make meritorious deeds." Tang Ning looked at her and said to Emperor Chen, "Your Majesty, my trip is very dangerous. Commander Gong Sun is very capable. Why not let her go with me, so that I can feel more at ease?" Chen Huang glanced at Gong Sun Ying and said, "You go out first." Gong Sun Ying stood up and slowly retreated. Emperor Chen then looked at Tang Ning, frowned and said, "Whether this person sincerely surrenders or not is a matter of debate. If we take her with us, what if something goes wrong?" Tang Ning said sternly, "It is precisely because I am not sure whether this person will surrender that I want to take this opportunity to give her a try. If she has evil intentions, it is much better to follow me to Jiangnan than to stay with His Majesty." "You are interested?" Chen Huang was silent for a moment, nodded and said, "Then let her go to Jiangnan with you. If she really plans something, you can act as appropriate. If necessary, you can kill her." When he said the last sentence, his face turned completely cold, and murderous intent loomed in his eyes. Tang Ning cupped her hands and said, "Please remember this." Chen Huang nodded and said, "Go back and prepare. Things will change later, so you should set off as soon as possible." Tang Ning walked out of the imperial study and walked across the square in front of her. She saw Gong Sun Ying standing at the head of the White Jade Bridge, seemingly waiting for him. She looked at Tang Ning and asked, "Did the emperor agree?" Tang Ning looked at her and asked, "What are you going to Jiangnan for?" Gong Sun Ying pulled the corner of his mouth and asked, "Didn't you guess it?" Tang Ning looked at her and asked, "Was the Jiangnan rebellion caused by Bai Jin?" Gong Sun Ying snorted coldly and said, "Who else could it be except her?" In fact, Tang Ning didn't guess at first what the Jiangnan rebellion had to do with Bai Jin. After all, Su Mei's master looked like a smart man. Normal people would not do such a stupid thing as inciting the people to rebel in Jiangnan. 9 out of 10 rebels in history were in the north. This was because the people in the north had a harder life. The court's taxes were a little harsher, or when there was a disaster, the people would be displaced. As long as they were instigated, rebellion was nothing to them for survival. But the south was different. Jiangnan was rich and the people lived in peace. With no worries about food and clothing, who would be willing to rebel? Seeing Gong Sun Ying's attitude, Tang Ning had to suspect Bai Jin of this matter. After all, even if there was a rebellion in Jiangnan, it was in Chen State, which had nothing to do with her. Why was she so anxious? Tang Ning looked at Gong Sun Ying and asked, "Why did they do this?" "Who are you?" Gong Sun Ying looked at him and laughed, "Why, didn't Bai Jin tell you?" Tang Ning looked at her calmly and asked, "Do you know what His Majesty said to me just now?" Gong Sun Ying sneered and said, "Emperor Chen has never really trusted me, so naturally he asked you to be on guard against me." "You guessed half right." Tang Ning looked at her, stretched out his hand, gently wiped her neck, and said, "He also said that if you don't listen, he will kill you." Gong Sun Ying's face changed slightly, because he knew that Tang Ning had this ability. Not to mention the 100 elite soldiers, she was far from being a match for the butcher who followed him. Tang Ning looked at Gong Sun Ying again and said, "Be obedient and tell me everything you know." Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 553. Chapter 550 of the text volume of Ruyi Little Man, Gongsun Ying, the former Lianguo tribe, looked at Tang Ning and saw his indifferent eyes. At that moment, he did not dare to meet his eyes. He subconsciously looked away, lowered his head and said, "We are the old members of the Liang kingdom, have been traveling abroad for these years with the purpose of reviving Liang." This was a secret that she would not easily reveal to outsiders, but at this time, the situation forced her to hide it in front of him. "So you joined the grassland and Baijin was in the Chen kingdom, all for the purpose of rebellion?" Tang Ning looked at her and asked, "As far as I know, the demise of the Liang kingdom does not seem to have anything to do with the Chen kingdom." "Neither she nor I want to rebel." Gongsun Ying looked away and said, "We just want to use the power of Chenguo and the grassland to achieve the great cause of restoring the country." Tang Ning shook her head and asked, "Do you think Emperor Chen will help you realize the great cause of restoring the country?" Gongsun Ying said, "The current Emperor Chen doesn't know how to do it, but it doesn't mean that the Emperor Chen doesn't know how to do it in the future." Tang Ning thought for a moment and realized that Gongsun Ying and Baijin must have been targeting a certain prince. With their IQ and skills, they obviously couldn't defeat Emperor Chen. But if the successor was Prince Duan or Prince Kong, especially for the latter, as long as he uses some tricks, it might be possible to get him to agree to send troops to Nanzhao. He looked at Gongsun Ying, thought of something else, and asked, "You and Baijin don't seem to be united to achieve great things. You'd better not think about lying to me. You know the consequences." Gongsun Ying no longer concealed it and explained, "Although we are also restoring the country, Baijin is running for the king of Gizhu, and I am planning for the king of Wu. Each is his own master. Naturally, I will not join forces with her." Tang Ning did not expect that the Liang kingdom was not united even in its restoration. One mountain could not accommodate two tigers, and one country could not have two masters. There was no hope of restoration, so the two factions started fighting in the nest. It was obvious that neither Baijin nor Gongsun Shadow, ideological consciousness needs to be improved, and it is difficult to distinguish what is the main contradiction and what is the secondary contradiction. Before the Liang kingdom has truly recovered, the united front is the top priority. Tang Ning was not interested in teaching them this. She looked at her and continued to ask, "What does this have to do with Baijin and the others going to Jiangnan?" Gongsun Ying looked away and said, "I don't know the specifics, but I guess that King Qian has been hiding in Jiangnan for more than 10 years. Baijin went to Jiangnan this time because something happened to King Qian." After listening to Gongsun Ying's explanation, Tang Ning recalled that when Baijin and Su Mei left, they seemed a little anxious, as if the incident had happened suddenly, and judging from Baijin's expression and attitude, it was probably not a good thing. As for the chaos in Jiangnan, it is no surprise that they were the cause. No wonder Gongsun Ying was so anxious when she heard that Baijin and the others had gone to Jiangnan. Compared to her, who was imprisoned in the palace by Emperor Chen and squeezed out the remaining value, her rival senior sister had already experienced a huge amount of intelligence within Chen state, internet, and getting involved with Chen Guo's powerful people. No matter from which angle you look at it, she is more backward. If they were allowed to cause any big trouble in Jiangnan, there would be no hope for her and the master she was loyal to. After Gongsun Ying finished speaking, he looked at Tang Ning again and asked, "I have said everything that needs to be said. When will we go to Jiangnan?" "What's the hurry?" Tang Ning glanced at her and waved, "Go back and wait for the notification." Gongsun Ying watched Tang Ning turn and leave, with a hint of gloom on his face, but it was more of helplessness. What she just said was a huge secret and would not be revealed at will. However, if she did not tell it, she would be trapped in this palace forever and would never see the light of day again. Huang Chen was much more difficult to deal with than she had imagined, which made her give up her previous idea of controlling him, and escaping from the palace as soon as possible was what she should do most. Tang Ning was extremely smart and had many tricks. Even she would feel a little powerless when fighting against him. Fortunately, he and Baijin seemed to have some unclear relationship, and even if he was told, he would not leak the matter. Gong Sunying looked back unwillingly, turned around and walked towards a certain palace. After Tang Ning came out of the palace, she was not in a hurry to go home. Instead, she went to the staff department first. This time he went to Jiangnan. Although his main task was to investigate someone who incited the people to rebel, his official identity was that he was an examination official in the Ministry of Personnel. As a result, the originally arranged Dr. Feng Si Feng had to stay in the Ministry of Personnel department. When he returned to the check-in room, he looked at the clerk at the door and said, "Go and find Dr. Feng." The clerk responded and left in a hurry. After a while, Dr. Feng walked in and asked respectfully, "What are your orders, sir?" Tang Ning looked at him and said, "I arranged for you to go to Jiangnan to take the exam. Now you don't have to go. I want to go to Jiangnan myself." Dr. Feng's expression changed and he blurted out, "What?" Tang Ning glanced at him and asked, "Do you have any objections?" Dr. Feng's face was immediately filled with a smile, and he said, "My lord, I have misunderstood, but I am just a little curious. The candidates for Jiangnan are changing again and again, which is a bit strange." Tang Ning said, "This is His Majesty's arrangement." Dr. Feng immediately said, "I understand, I will obey my order." Tang Ning looked at him and said, "Okay, go down." Dr. Feng cupped his hands and said, "I'm going to resign." After he walked out of the room, he returned to his duty room and sat for a while. When he was about to leave the office, he walked out of the official office alone and got on a certain sedan chair. Not far from the entrance of the Ministry of Personnel, a beggar stood up and followed from a distance. The sedan turned around the streets in the city, and also went around several alleys, and finally stopped in front of the back door of a high gate. Dr. Feng got off the carriage and hurriedly walked in from the back door. A beggar in the corner looked up and didn't see the plaque. He walked around the house for a whole circle before walking to the front door. He looked up, and then gave a few words to the beggars in the corner, and disappeared in the vast crowd. At the door of the house, Tang Ning looked at the beggar gang disciple and said, "Thank you for your hard work. You keep an eye on Dr. Feng. If there is anything, come and report immediately." It was not unexpected that Dr. Feng was involved with the Tang family. It seemed that the things done by the first two doctors in the Ministry of Personnel were also done by the Tang family. It can be seen from this that the Tang family should also have some secrets in Jiangnan that they don't want others to know. After he arrives in Jiangnan, he can pay more attention to it. As for Dr. Feng, since he is from the Tang family, he can arrange it in advance. When he returned home, he didn't know how to tell Xiaoi and the others about this matter. After all, he had just returned from Chu not long ago, and this time he had to go to Jiangnan again. Although the distance was not that far, it was not an easy thing to take the exam. If he delayed it a little, a few months would pass. He stood in the yard, watching Xiao Xiao practice, and couldn't help but sigh that time passed so quickly. The skinny firewood girl had obviously grown into a graceful young lady. She just celebrated her 15th birthday not long ago. She has grown a lot in the past 2 years and is almost as tall as Xiru and Xiaoi. In a few years, I'm afraid she will be able to catch up with Tang Yao Yao. Brother. When she saw him, Xiao Xiao put down her sword and walked over quickly. She must have been practicing for a while, her face was flushed, and sweat was oozing from her forehead. Tang Ning took out a handkerchief and helped her wipe the sweat off, and her face became even redder. Tang Ning smiled and pinched her face, saying, "Go take a shower, it's time to eat soon." Xiao Xiao said and ran away. Tang Ning was about to go back to his room when he noticed two pairs of eyes on him, one on the left and one on the right. He looked to the left and saw the old beggar squatting in the corner, looking at him with a vigilant look. He looked to the right again and saw Lao Zheng looking at him with the same look. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 554. Chapter 551 of the main volume of Ruyi Little Man. Tang Ning has seen the looks directed at the old beggar and old Zheng too many times. Rich man Tang, King Xian, and even Su Mei's master Bai Jin all used this kind of look. His eyes looked at him, so he knew exactly what this look meant. It's not surprising that Tang Keizu and King Xian showed such expressions, because they were both guarding against him stealing their daughter, although it was useless for them to guard against him. But the old beggar went too far. Xiao Xiao was still a child and was his sister. Although he only did it, he would not do it to his god sister even if he was a beast. What's more, Xiao Xiao was still his savior, and Tang Ning didn't have the feudal and backward concept of having to pledge himself to save his life. Taking a step back, once a teacher, always a father. The little girl has now transformed from a firewood girl into a beautiful girl. It is reasonable for a master to guard against some beasts, but Lao Zheng's eyes are the same as his. It's hard to understand. What is he worried about? Tang Ning didn't want to think in a more animalistic direction, so she looked at him and said, "The official department has an errand. I need to pack my things and go to Jiangnan in 2 days." Before old Zheng could speak, the old beggar raised his head and said, "Go to Jiangnan. If you pass by Yuezhu, help me bring back some jars of high-quality daughter Hong." Tang Ning glanced at him and asked, "The wine at home isn't enough for you?" "You know nothing." The old beggar rolled his eyes at him and said, "You will get tired of eating a dish for a long time, and you will get bored if you look at it alone for a long time. Otherwise, why would you marry 3 wives and still eat from the bowl while looking at the pot? How many jars of daughter's red do you want? The more the merrier." It can be seen from drinking that the old beggar is not a dedicated person. When he gets tired of drinking Zuyeking, he switches to Wulyanjai, and when he gets tired of Wulyanjai, he switches to Envlianjai. Although Tang Ning has no shame in saying that he is dedicated, at least he will not get tired of it. He walked into the inner courtyard and found that the usually bustling inner courtyard was a little deserted. Xiao Ru Xiaoai was not there, but she found Tang Yao Yao in Xiaoai's study. She was actually reading a book, and she was still reading Female Training. Tang Ning walked in and asked, "Where are the 2 of them?" "I went shopping." Tang Yao Yao closed the book, stood up and asked, "Why are you back so early today? Are you hungry? I'll go to the kitchen to get you something to eat." Tang Ning was not used to her suddenly becoming so gentle, generous, and considerate. She was stunned and said, "I'm not very hungry." "Then I'm still hungry." Tang Yao Yao fetched some pastries from the kitchen, poured a pot of tea, and said, "Let's rest first, Xiaoai and the others will be back soon." Tang Ning ate pastries and drank tea. She thought that she would eventually tell them about her trip to Jiangnan, so she said, "His Majesty summoned me to the palace today and arranged an errand. I will go to Jiangnan in 2 days. "Jiangnan?" Tang Yao Yao was stunned for a moment, looked at him, and asked suspiciously, "Why are you going to Jiangnan on some errand? Is the little fox also in Jiangnan?" Tang Ning said, "Jiangnan is so big and has dozens of state capitals, so you may not be able to meet her." Tang Yao Yao said, "I'll go too." Tang Ning looked at her and asked in surprise, "What are you going to do?" Tang Yao Yao glanced at him and said, "I have never been to Jiangnan. They say Jiangnan is good and has beautiful scenery. I plan to go and see it." "No, there are still many dangers along the way, so you can't go." Tang Ning refused without thinking. At first, he wanted to take the whole family to have fun, but after knowing the mission of this trip, he gave up the idea. It would be okay if he was the only one. He had the means to save his life, and he also had Lao Zheng and Sharp Blade by his side, so he didn't worry much about safety. But if the whole family went to Jiangnan, if something happened, they would definitely not be able to take care of it. None of them would be able to take care of it. If something goes wrong, he will regret it for the rest of his life. Tang Yaoyao narrowed her eyes and looked at him. Danger. Tang Ning explained, as long as Lao Zheng is with me, nothing will happen. Tang Yaoyao crossed his arms and said, then I'll go too. Tang Ning looked at her and whispered, be obedient. Tang Yaoyao glared at him, don't listen. Tang Ning frowned and said, if you continue to disobey me, I will take care of you. Tang Yaoyao said angrily, how dare you? I am the head of the family, why don't I dare? Tang Ning straightened up, puffed out her chest, looked at her, and said solemnly, as long as you stay in the Tang family for one day, you will be the third wife of the Tang family, and you must listen to me. Tang Yaoyao looked at him, her face suddenly turned red, she lowered her head and whispered, well, then I won't go, you have to be careful. That's how you behave. Tang Ning gave her a solemn look, then turned around and walked out of the study. The moment she stepped out of the door, she breathed a long sigh of relief, wiped the cold sweat from her forehead, and finally felt relieved. It is very dangerous to show the majesty of the head of the family in front of the Tang fairy. If he fails to show his majesty, he will be ridiculed instead. The fact that Fairy Tang was so obedient this time was beyond his expectation. Is it true that domineering CEOs are more popular in both ancient and modern times? However, besides Tang Yaoyao, there was another person who needed to be convinced. In a secret courtyard somewhere in the inner courtyard, after Tang Yu heard what he said, she smiled and said, be careful all the way. Mom won't go this time. Tang Ning said, this time I have official business. I will take you to Jiangnan next time. Tang Yu smiled and said, your father said that he would take me there. You should go with Xiao Yi, Xiao Ru Yao Yao and the others. After a while, Tang Ning came out of the yard, feeling relieved. After dealing with the two most difficult people in the family, it became much easier for Xiao Ru and Xiao Yi to explain. At the same time, the Tang family in the capital. Tang Qi looked at Dr. Sci-fi and frowned, you said the person who went to Jiangnan has changed again. Who did it change? Dr. Sci-fi said, it was replaced by Tang Ning, the acting minister. It's him. Tang Qi frowned more tightly and asked, why was there a sudden change of people? Dr. Sci-fi said, he said this is His Majesty's arrangement. Tang Qi nodded and said, I understand. Dr. Sci-fi looked at him and asked tentatively, Master Tang, could it be that His Majesty is dissatisfied with Jiangnan and wants to intervene? Why are you panicking? Tang Qi's expression became much calmer and he said calmly, Your Majesty has been dissatisfied with Jiangnan for a long time. It's not like he hasn't done anything and can't do anything. Whoever touches this pot of porridge in Jiangnan will die, but I hope he steps in. Dr. Sci-fi thought for a while and gradually felt relieved. There are countless high-ranking officials in the DPRK who are native to the south of the Yangtze River. They come from the south of the Yangtze River and naturally want to safeguard the interests of the south of the Yangtze River. The local officials and gentry in the south of the Yangtze River are not easy to mess with. The court is beyond the reach of the government. Many of those sent there will even end up badly. Death. After he calmed down, he looked at Tang Qi and said, in that case, I will leave first. Wait a minute. Tang Qi looked at him and warned, Tang Ning is full of tricks. If you are in the staff department, keep an eye on him. If anything happens, come and report it in time. Dr. Sci-fi surrendered and said, if I know this, I will definitely keep an eye on him. The next day the official office opened, and Dr. Feng came to the office early. This time, Jiangnan's exams will fall on someone else's shoulders. Things will be more troublesome than expected. He must keep an eye on Tang Ning. He had just arrived at the duty room. Not long after he sat down, an official came in with a piece of paper in his hand and looked at him with a strange look on his face. Dr. Feng looked at Si Feng Yuanwei Lang and asked, "What's wrong with Yuanwei Lang?" The official stepped forward, handed him the piece of paper, and said, "Master Feng, this is your transfer order." Dr. Feng said in surprise, "What kind of transfer order?" Si Feng Yuanwei Lang said, "You have been asked to take charge of the examinations for officials in Shazhou, Suzhou, Ganzhou and other places. You will set off immediately." What? After hearing this, Dr. Feng stood up and his expression changed drastically. Suzhou, Ganzhou and other places are already in the extreme west of Chen State. Further west from Shazhou is where the western regions and Zibo are. To the north is the territory of the grassland barbarians. That is the most chaotic place in Chen State. It is so chaotic. The Ministry of Civil Affairs has not sent anyone to take the exam for many years. The officials who took the exam the first 2 times died there directly. This is not a mission at all, this is an exile. He looked pale, stood up hurriedly, and walked out of the check-in room. After a while, Tang Ning looked at the pale-faced Dr. Feng and wondered, this is a decision from above. The officials have nothing to do. Master Feng must also be considerate of the difficulties faced by the officials. Dr. Feng said anxiously, "But there are so many people in the official department, why is it me?" "There are so many people in the official department, why can't it be you?" Tang Ning looked at him and frowned. "Does Dr. Feng think that this officer is deliberately targeting you?" Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 555. Due to a lot of delays due to the trip to the western regions, Tang Ning and Li Tianlan's 3-year agreement was postponed for half a year. Later, when Xiru became pregnant, he stayed in Guizhou for another half a year, a full year longer than the agreed time. With that aunt's temperament, Tang Ning could imagine that after arriving in Chu, what awaited him would definitely not be calm. There will be unimaginable storms. However, things must be faced sooner or later. No matter what, he can't delay this trip to Chu State any longer. Xiaoi was just pregnant, and her due date was still more than half a year away. Half a year was enough for him to travel to Chu State. Tang Ning did not plan to take Lao Zhen with her when she went out this time. After all, every time he went out, Lao Zhen was loyally guarding him and he spent very little time with his daughter. Only after Tang Ning had her daughter did she know what it was like to be a father. During this time, let him take good care of himself. Let's spend some time with my daughter. Naturally, Tang Yaoyao couldn't take her with him. If one jealous person was upset, Tang Ning would have a headache. If 2 were upset at once, he couldn't imagine what that would be like. Fortunately, she was busy with business at the Chamber of Commerce, so it was impossible to stay with him this time. This time she went to Chu State not to fight, so she just took the 2 elders with her. She decided to leave as soon as possible. Tang Ning spent a few days arranging things at home. During this period, she also received a reply from Mr. Su, and the arrangements were made. After everything is done, prepare to leave in 2 days. The day before leaving, Tang Ning was sitting in the pavilion blowing in the wind, wondering if there was anything he had missed. Xiao Xiao slowly walked over and stood behind Tang Ning. While holding Tang Ning's shoulders, she asked, "Brother, am I not, can I go to Chu State with you?" "Ah," Tang Ning was a little surprised and asked, "Why are you going to Chu country?" Xiao Xiao lowered his head and said, "I miss Sister Lan." The last time they went to Chu State, they happened to meet Li Tianlan. Xiao Xiao had lived in the princess mansion for a long time, and he thought he had some feelings for her. Moreover, he didn't know if it was Tang Ning's misunderstanding, but he always felt that Xiao Xiao was always depressed after returning to Guizhou, as if he had something on his mind. Tang Ning initially thought that she was not used to the environment here, but after asking her several times, She just shook her head silently. Although Tang Ning didn't know the reason, she gradually discovered that she seemed to really dislike this place. Naturally, Tang Ning would not refuse her request. However, before he could speak, the old beggar snorted and said, "Boss Tang, doesn't my dear disciple just want to go to the Chu kingdom with you? You are hesitant and hesitant. What's the matter? If you don't want to take her there, I can take her there myself." Tang Ning smiled and touched her little head and said, "Are you not used to living in Guizhou?" Xiao Xiao nodded sheepishly. Although Guizhou has been developing rapidly over the past year, for those who are used to living in the capital, it still feels like a remote place. Tang Ning smiled and said, "Pack your things and we'll set off tomorrow. Brother is the best." Tang Ning felt like she was kissing her gently on the face, and then she happily ran back to pack her luggage. Tang Ning touched her cheek helplessly, but noticed something strange in the atmosphere. When she turned to look at the old beggar, she found that he was looking at her with an evil look. The old beggar looked at Tang Ning and said with stern eyes, "Boy Tang, it seems that I have to have a chat with you." Tang Ning asked casually, "What are you talking about? Be more serious, me." The old beggar looked at him seriously and said, "My precious disciple is already a big girl. Although you are his adopted brother, you must also know how to avoid suspicion. You must not kiss you if you are a man or a woman. Understand?" If it weren't for Xiao Xiao, Tang Ning would have died in that alley in Lingzhou 5 years ago. In this life, as long as she has a bowl of rice from him, Xiao Xiao will never be hungry. Although she is not her biological sister, Tang Ning regards her as closer than a family member. How can she allow this old guy to slander her? If Tang Ning hadn't been unable to defeat him, she would have fallen out with him long ago. Tang Ning frowned slightly and asked, "What have you been thinking about all day?" The old beggar looked at him with squinted eyes and said, "What I am thinking about is not something." The old guy's words were a bit scolding, and Tang Ning was a little angry and said, "She is my sister first, and then your apprentice. You don't need to teach me some things." The old beggar sat down opposite him and said, "I also want to go to Chu with you." "Whatever." The old beggar obviously had ulterior motives, but Tang Ning didn't care. If he didn't go, he wouldn't go. If he went, he could become a free thug, so why not? What I didn't expect was that after a while, Lao Zheng also made the same request. "You want to go to Chu country too?" Tang Ning looked at him and asked in surprise, "You won't accompany my daughter?" "I have been with her for more than half a year, and I have long been annoyed by her father," Lao Zheng said. "Idle time is idle. Last time I met a master in Chu state, and I suffered a small loss without warning. This time I went to see what I could do. I can't get my place back." Tang Ning originally didn't plan to let Lao Zheng accompany him, but since he asked for it, Tang Ning didn't stop him. One more person would bring more strength. One more person, the ant might leave some for him because of the large number of people. Save face. After leaving Guizhou this time, Tang Ning was worried about Xiao Yi the most. How could she feel at ease when others were taking care of her? It was late at night, and Tang Ning was still in the study, perfecting several food supplements and even arranging a plan for her recovery after giving birth. Qing'er pushed the door open from outside and quietly placed a midnight snack on the table in front of him. Then she walked behind him and skillfully helped him massage his shoulders. Qing'er's cooking skills had obviously improved a lot in the past few days. Tang Ning drank a few sips of soup, gently grabbed her hand, and let her sit on his lap. "Aunt, uncle." A voice of surprise and panic came to his ears. The voice was also very familiar, but it was not from Qing'er, who Tang Ning was familiar with. He lowered his head and looked at Xiu, who was leaning on his chest. He was stunned for a moment. Xiu leaned her head on his chest and hugged her tightly. Tears flashed in her eyes. She sobbed and said, "We've you, uncle, have you finally remembered Xiu?" The delicate body in his arms was trembling slightly. Tang Ning could feel the mood of the girl in his arms. He was about to push her hand away, but he slowly took it back. He hugged the girl in his arms, watching her cry with joy in his arms. While hugging her tightly, he also sighed in his heart. There are more than one or two stubborn maids like Xiu'er and Qing'er. It's all because of this evil feudal society. Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 556. Chapter 553 of the main volume of the Ruyi Young Man, Departure. In fact, when Tang Ning and Tang Yaoyao slept together last night, they had an in-depth discussion about this illicit marriage. At this time, no more than in modern times, a woman's honor and integrity were of paramount importance. Although she could reconcile, she would be criticized everywhere, and it would be difficult to remarry. Therefore, Tang Yajing, who had given him a grand ceremony, was already in his hands. The two of them were lying on the same bed last night, but they didn't feel sleepy, so they got up and ate midnight snacks. They both drank some wine and talked about it a little drunk. Tang Ning said that since we all know each other so well, it's better to make do with it from now on. Come on, Tang Yaoyao said that although the people who wanted to marry her could circle the capital together, a good girl would never marry again, and she would never marry anyone else in her life. Whether it was the drunkenness that made people cowardly or the drunken narration of the truth, the two of them had reached an agreement on this matter. I don't know if Tang Yaoyao would still remember this when he woke up. When she fell asleep, she lost a bit of Tang Nuxia's clean and tidy look. She seemed to have trouble sleeping without holding something between her legs. Tang Ning was the one holding something between her legs, and she was sleeping on all sides at the moment. With the 8-pointed back, no sign of sleep. This was completely different from how she looked when she woke up. She kissed him secretly when he woke up. When he found out, she knocked him out and lied that he had a nightmare in the morning. When Tang Ning helped her cover the quilt, she remembered this incident and couldn't help but feel angry and jealous. She also kissed her on the face to retaliate for the kiss that day. Tang Yaoyao still didn't wake up. Tang Ning looked at her and walked away with a proud expression. Not long after, Xiu'er walked in from the door with hot water. Before entering the room, she shouted loudly, "Miss, the sun is shining on your butt, get up." She stepped into the room and looked at Tang Yaoyao, who was rolling around excitedly on the bed holding the quilt, and said in surprise, "Miss, are your legs cramped?" Tang Yaoyao sat up from the bed. Xiu'er looked at her and saw that she was fine. Then he wet the towel, handed it to her, and said, "My uncle is leaving at noon. Miss, get up quickly. We will go to see you off soon. Where is my uncle?" Tang Yaoyao took the towel and wiped her face with some reluctance. She seemed to have thought of something, and the corners of her mouth raised involuntarily. Today is the time to set off. 100 members of the Blade are pretending to be charioteers and so on. Plus Yashi Zhongcheng and his 2 long followers, that's all the people on this trip to the south of the Yangtze River. The reason why there is a censor Zhongcheng is because in the process of evaluating local officials, in order to prevent the official department from covering the sky with one hand, the imperial court specially arranged for people from the censor station to accompany and supervise. The Yashitai clearly attached great importance to this trip to Jiangnan Road. They sent one of the 2 Yashitai Zhongcheng. The status of Yashi Zhongcheng in the Yashitai is equivalent to that of a minister, and he is the real second in command. Tang Ning said goodbye to them at the city gate, lowered the curtain of the carriage, and the motorcade started slowly. At the gate of the city, Zhongyi clasped his hands together and whispered, "Blessed by Bodhisattva, may your trip be safe and sound, without any illness or disaster." Tang Yaoyao imitated his example, closed her hands, and murmured in a low voice, "Huanyan Bodhisattva, the Jade Emperor, the Grand Supreme Lejun, is as anxious as the law, protect him not to encounter any dangers, and not to encounter any vixens." Before setting off, Tang Ning knew that their trip would encounter a lot of troubles, but she did not expect that less than a day after setting off, they encountered their first obstacle. Censor Zhongcheng looked at him and frowned. Why do we have to take a long way around? In the past, we went from Shangzhou to Dengzhou, then passed through Suizhou and Anzhou, and then we could switch to water and go straight to the south of the Yangtze River. Why do we have to take a long way this time? Tang Ning glanced at him and said, this is the arrangement of the officials. The main purpose of his trip to Jiangnan this time was not to assess local officials, but to rebel against Jiangnan. Naturally, the path he chose was not for the convenience of exams. Censor Zhongcheng looked at him and said in a deep voice, even if Mr. Tang represents the official department this time, he can't be too arbitrary. Otherwise, what's the point of accompanying me on censorship station? It didn't matter to Tang Ning whether the Yashitai faction sent people, as long as they didn't cause trouble, but now it seemed that the Yashitai Zhongcheng didn't seem to have such an awareness. He casually took the sword from the carriage and pulled it out with a clang. Censor Zhongcheng's expression changed drastically. He quickly took a few steps back and said loudly, Master Tang, what do you want to do? Master Qi, don't be nervous. Tang Ning carefully looked at the sword in his hand and said, this is a Shangfang sword that your majesty gave to me before leaving. This sword can kill treacherous people at the lower level and treacherous ministers at the upper level. He handed the sword to Yashi Zhongcheng and said, Master Qi, what do you think of this sword? Yashi Zhongcheng subconsciously took the sword and his face gradually turned pale. He didn't know before that His Majesty trusted him so much. With this sword in his hand, he had an excuse to do anything. Even if he beheaded him in the wilderness, he could make up an excuse when he went back to expose the matter. After all, His Majesty even handed over Shangfang's sword to him, so why would he still care about a mere censor Zhongcheng? He handed the sword to Tang Ning again, coughed slightly, and said, I am feeling a little unwell. I leave it to Master Tang to make the final decision on such a trivial matter as which route to take to Jiangnan. Tang Ning smiled and nodded, and said, Master Qi, please pay more attention to your health. From the capital to Jiangnan, even if they take the waterway, it will take a month at the fastest. After all, they are not traveling all the way. When they arrive in Jiangnan, they will stay at least one day or more than a few days at every place they visit. Along the way, if they are like this, the censor Zhongcheng would cause him some trouble from time to time, and he would be annoyed to death. Tang Ning handed Shangfang's sword to Chenzhou, and Chenzhou put it back. When he came out this time, in addition to the 100 men with sharp swords, he also brought Chenzhou with him. There was no use in having more people. The main thing was that Chenzhou was easy to use and would not cause trouble to him like them. If it weren't for them, who insisted on defeating the Shadow Guard so miserably, maybe the hard work of going to Jiangnan this time wouldn't have been his turn. He left his hometown not long after his wedding. He felt sad. Only he knew about it, especially since he and Tang Yejing had already discussed it. If he got drunk twice more, he might be able to take one step forward, or 2 steps forward. But now he was completely trapped. Interrupt. In the capital, rich man Tang was sitting on a chair, rattling the abacus in his hand. Tang Yao Yao walked in from the outside and said, Dad. Rich man Tang kept thinking about the abacus in his hands and spoke without raising his head, say. Tang Yao Yao said, I want to go to Jiangnan. Yes, rich man Tang responded. Tang Yao Yao looked at him and said in surprise, Father, do you agree? Rich man Tang put down his calculations and asked, why don't you agree? Tang Yao Yao thought he didn't hear clearly just now and repeated, I want to go to Jiangnan. Your father's ears still work. Rich man Tang stood up and said, just in time, in half a month, the family's caravan will go to Jiangnan, so you can follow them. Tang Yao Yao looked at rich man Tang in shock, walked up to him, touched his forehead, then touched her own, and said in surprise, it's not hot. She originally thought that her idea of going to Jiangnan would be met with strong opposition here, and she had already prepared a plan to cry, make trouble, hang herself, or run away if it didn't work, but she didn't expect that she didn't even take the first step. He actually agreed. Rich man Tang looked at her and said, "Go to Jiangnan and return to Jiangnan, but if you see that kid, don't think that you can do whatever you want outside." Tang Yao Yao patted her chest and said, "No, I promise." Rich man Tang glanced at her and said, "Outside, you are not far away from the capital, even the Emperor Tiangao. Even if you really did something, we don't know, I don't know, and Xiaoi and the others don't know either." "Dad, where are you thinking?" Tang Yao Yao looked at him and said, "I'm just worried that he will be in danger. It's not like you don't know that with his three-legged cat skills, he can fight a few thieves, but when he encounters a real the most powerful people have to rely on me." Seeing her jumping and running out happily, Rich man Tang sighed and shook his head helplessly. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 557. Compared to Chu, Chen State was much richer, and the main reason was that Chen State occupied the land of Jiangnan. This chapter was first published on ai-u-sheng-novel.com, please remember the website address. Jiangnan was rich in products and provided a large amount of tax revenue to Chen State every year. Even though Jiangnan was not close to the capital, the court's control over the local areas was weakened, and local officials could still play many tricks on taxation, but the benefits the court got from Jiangnan were still considerable. In addition, because the people lived a rich life, they had been peaceful and stable since ancient times, and there had never been any chaos. There were many officials from Jiangnan who had a lot of say in the court. The court and even the emperor turned a blind eye to some chaos in Jiangnan. A state in Jiangnan. A tall mansion. Although Jiangnan was far away from the political center of Chen State, it was home to many wealthy families and businessmen. In terms of wealth, even the capital could not compare with it. Therefore, luxurious mansions can be seen everywhere in the states of Jiangnan, and the luxury of this mansion in Jiangnan, where the people were generally wealthy, was also rare. The young man in fancy clothes strode out of the mansion. An old woman chased him out and stopped him. She said anxiously, "Prince, the prince has been dead for only a few months. Logically, you should observe mourning for 3 years. During these 3 years, you must wear mourning clothes and cannot gather or visit friends." 3 years, the young man in fancy clothes looked at her and asked, "During this special period, we don't have to care about these things. Big things are coming. Can we wait for 3 years? Prince should not be so anxious. Jiangnan is extremely important to the state of Chen. Once there is a mess, the imperial army will march straight in. By then, our arrangements for many years will be destroyed." The old woman looked at him and said, "Let's take a step back. The prince's body is still warm. Prince should not wear such gorgeous clothes." The young man in fancy clothes looked at her, his face sank, and said, "Bai Jin, you'd better understand your own identity. You are just a servant. What qualifications do you have to tell me what to do?" After that, he glanced at Bai Jin coldly and turned away. An old man with a gloomy face walked out of the house, glanced at the old woman, and followed the young man. Su Mei walked out of the house, covered her mouth and yawned, looked at the old woman, and said lazily, "The king of Qian has passed away. Is there any meaning in all you have done?" The old woman looked at her and said solemnly, "Although the king of Qian unfortunately passed away, there is still the prince. He is also the royal orthodoxy. There is no difference between supporting the prince and supporting the king of Qian." Su Mei glanced at her and asked, "Will the king of Qian talk to you like that?" The old woman looked away and said, the prince is still young, I will lead him to the right path. Then you lead him slowly. Su Mei yawned again and asked, when will we return to the capital? I haven't had a comfortable sleep for several months. I will go back when I should go back. The old woman glanced at her and strode in the direction where the young man disappeared. Su Mei glanced at her, turned around lazily, and walked deep into the house. The two guards at the door slowly turned their heads, their eyes slanted, and they didn't know how many times they swallowed their saliva in a short time. After traveling for half a month, the climate gradually became pleasant since they crossed a certain mountain a few days ago. The court held a small test for local officials every year and a big test every 3 years. This time it was the turn of the big test, which was also the reason why the Ministry of Personnel was so busy. In another 2 days' journey, they would enter the Jiangnan West Road. Although Tang Ning's purpose of this trip was the Jiangnan East Road, the superficial test had to be done. When they got there, they should slow down. The court's assessment of officials was very complicated. Civil officials were different from military officials, Beijing officials were different from foreign officials, and chief officials were different from assistant officials. The direction of the assessment also ranged from personal morality, local governance and folk customs, to agricultural and forestry reclamation, tax collection, population increase, social security, etc. There were dozens of items, which were very detailed. Tang Ning couldn't inspect all of these at every place he went. There were many low-level officials in the Ministry of Personnel who were specifically responsible for these things. At every place he went, he assigned one person to be responsible and 2 members of the blade to ensure safety, and the rest could continue forward. Tang Ning was sitting in the carriage. At a certain moment, someone knocked on the carriage. Chen Zhou lifted the curtain and said, "General, 10 miles ahead is Anzhou City." It was not late at this moment, but if we passed Anzhou City and went forward, we would not be able to reach the next resting place within today, so we could only camp on the spot. Tang Ning thought for a moment and said, "Then let's rest in Anzhou City for 1 night. Rest here for a quarter of an hour, and then set off for Anzhou City after a quarter of an hour." He jumped off the carriage, and the curtain of a carriage behind him was lifted. The chief censor looked at him and asked, "Sir Tang, why did you stop?" Tang Ning said, "I plan to rest in the front Zhou City for 1 night. What do you think, Sir Qi?" "It's up to Sir Tang." After saying this, the chief censor lowered the curtain. Tang Ning stood by the road and took a few breaths of fresh air. The fatigue caused by the long journey suddenly dissipated a lot. Since the first day he discussed with the chief censor about the sharpness of the Shangfang sword given to him by Emperor Chen, Sir Qi from the censorate never argued with him again along the way, and he himself was able to have peace of mind. After passing Anzhou, the journey might not be so peaceful. He doesn't know what the situation is in Jiangnan yet, and he is not sure whether the chaos in Jiangnan was caused by Su Mei and others. Before leaving, Tang Ning learned Bai Jin's true identity from Gong Sun Ying, and tried to guess their purpose. Chen State occupied the Central Plains and Jiangnan, most of the northeast was occupied by Chu State, and the extinct Liang State was located in the Yunnan-Guizhou area. If they could occupy the east and west roads of Jiangnan, they would have a steady supply of food and money. Once they could form a team, they would go straight into Guizhou and sweep away the remaining forces there. With food and money, they could also form a team in Guizhou at any time, and Jiangnan was the top priority in this regard. Of course, whether they could achieve their wish depended on the premise that Chen State would sit idly by and watch what they did in Jiangnan, but this was obviously impossible. Jiangnan was the granary and money bag of Chen State. I am afraid that before they could make any waves in Jiangnan, the court had already sent a large army south to nip the signs of rebellion in the bud. It was not easy for the court to fight the barbarians on the grassland, but it was very simple to go south, and it would not take much effort to quell the rebellion. Unless Chen State encountered something more serious than the chaos in Jiangnan, such as the invasion of the Sushan people, or the invasion of the western regions, but the possibility of this happening is also very small. If there were chaos in the south, the west, and the north at the same time, Chen state would most likely not be able to survive, and naturally would not have time to take care of Jiangnan. At that time, it would be meaningless to take care of Jiangnan or not. Tang Ning looked at Gong Sunying standing next to the carriage and asked, "I remember you said that Baijin would not rebel. Once there is a change in Jiangnan, it will be easy for the Chen state court to send troops to pacify it." Gong Sunying looked over and said, "She is not that stupid. There should be some other hidden secrets in the Jiangnan incident." Gong Sunying seemed to be very sure about something. It seemed that there was a high probability that she would meet Baijin during this trip to Jiangnan, and it was very likely that it would be an unpleasant meeting. But this was not what Tang Ning cared about. It didn't matter whether she was happy with Baijin's old woman or not, as long as she was happy with other people. The 10-mile journey was not long, and it arrived in a flash. When the convoy arrived at the gate of Anzhou city, it lined up and slowly entered. Anzhou is just a small city, but people have to queue up to enter the city. Tang Ning lifted the curtain and looked around, and found that they happened to meet two caravans. 3 caravans entered the city at the same time, which made it a bit crowded. The accompanying members of the Sharp Blade looked at a group of rough and sturdy giants with an interested expression, while the petty officials of the Ministry of Personnel, including the chief censor and his followers, stared at several foreign women in another group with their arms and navels exposed. This chapter is first published on AIU Voice Novel Network. Please remember the website address. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 558. The 555th chapter of the main text of Ruyi Xiaolang Jun, Strike First and Gain the Upper Hand. Those exotic women are obviously from the western regions, and the rough men, judging from their attire, should undoubtedly be from the grasslands. Jiangnan business is booming, and merchants from the western regions and grasslands come to Jiangnan from thousands of miles away to do business, exchanging local treasures for Jiangnan specialties, and they can make a lot of money in one trip. Even the Tang family has business in Jiangnan, and the scale is not small. In fact, until now, Tang Ning doesn't know how rich his cheap father-in-law is. This also means that although he is far away in Jiangnan, he dare not be too extravagant. If he is seen by Tang Yejing's eyes, he will not be able to report back. After all, her current identity is not Xiaoai's best friend, but the third wife of the Tang family. They have not yet entered the Jiangnan road, but they are Beijing officials of the Ministry of Personnel after all. After checking into the post station, local officials in Anzhou heard about it and came to pay their respects. After that, the local officials hosted a welcoming banquet. They had attended many such banquets along the way. When in Rome, do as the Romans do. Tang Ning did not refuse such an occasion. It was not a good thing for officials from the capital to be too high-handed when they arrived in the local area. Anzhou was just a small city, neither prosperous nor wealthy. The best restaurant in the city looked a bit shabby, and the food was not to Tang Ning's taste. He ate a few bites and then left the box on the pretext of something, leaving the chief censor to deal with the situation. The capital or some important cities would have a curfew at night, but a small city like Anzhou did not need a curfew, and the people's nightlife was more lively than that of the capital. Although the hall downstairs was not full, it was also occupied. The most eye-catching guests were a table of people from the western regions. Their unique appearance made them more attractive than others. The men were fine, but the 2 women were tall and pretty, and were standard Western beauties. Most of the men downstairs glanced at them from time to time. Among the men, there was also a man who looked like a Han Chinese. Judging from where he sat, he should be the one with the highest status among them. This was a strange phenomenon that Tang Ning had seen, just like Zioan country, which was obviously a Western region country, but the envoys were Han Chinese. This Western region caravan was actually led by Han Chinese. When they chatted, They spoke in Western region dialect, and Tang Ning could not understand a word. On the other hand, when the grassland people at another table drank a lot and talked loudly, Tang Ning could occasionally understand one or two sentences. This was thanks to Wanyan Yan. When Tang Ning taught her Chinese, he also learned a lot of the language of the Sushan people from her. Although he could not communicate with the grassland people, he could string together the words he could understand and roughly understand what they meant. The eldest prince, the third prince and the fourth princess are the words they mentioned most. The reason why there is no second prince is that the second prince is dead. Obviously, these people are from the Wanyan tribe, and what they said is also the affairs of the Wanyan tribe. From them, Tang Ning heard a lot of news about Wanyan Yan. After the second prince died in Chu, his power on the grassland was inherited by Xiaomaniu. Although the eldest prince and the third prince have always wanted to seize her power to strengthen themselves, they have failed many times. The heirs of the Khan of the Wanyan tribe have officially formed a three-legged tripod. Of course, this is only for the three of them. The real commander of the Wanyan tribe is still their father. He holds most of the power of the Wanyan tribe. In recent years, he has been leading the expansion of the Wanyan tribe. Before Tang Ning left the capital, he heard that the situation on the grassland had changed. When Chen and Chu formed an alliance, one country secretly funded the Shuhu tribe, and the other country secretly supported the Jiagu tribe, forming a countervailing force with the Wanyan tribe, thinking that it could completely curb the expansion of the Wanyan tribe. Their goal was indeed achieved, but no one expected that in just 2 years, the Wanyan tribe would further suppress the two tribes, and the situation of the three tribes competing against each other had already shown a trend of being broken. No wonder the Emperor Chen attached so much importance to the affairs of Jiangnan. The chaos in Jiangnan alone was nothing to Chen's state, but if there was a problem in the north, the court would have no time to take care of it. Under the attack from the north and the south, the situation of Chen's state would immediately become serious. Although his soul came from another world, he lived in Chen's state after all, and his family and friends were all in Chen's state, and he did not want to see such a situation. Tang Ning could not understand what the grassland people said next, so he did not continue to listen and turned back to the box. However, during their conversation, they occasionally mixed in a few poor Chinese words, which reminded him of Wanyan Yan. The little girl in the past has become the female Khan today. Tang Ning always has a mysterious premonition that the two will meet again one day. The convoy stayed in Anzhou for a day and then set off again. 2 days later, they arrived at the border of Ezhou. Although Ezhou is still far away from their destination, it is indeed part of the Jiangnan West Road. The clerks of the Ministry of Personnel have to work when they enter Ezhou. Tang Ning had read the information of the Jiangnan states earlier. Compared with other states he passed along the way, Ezhou is already very rich. Copper mines are also produced in the state. According to convention, this should be the state that the Ministry of Personnel pays special attention to. However, Tang Ning knew the purpose of his trip. The examination of Jiangnan officials has always been the same. Even if there is something fishy, he does not intend to delve into it, let alone waste time here. Local officials of Ezhou had already been waiting outside the city. The governor of Ezhou personally came forward and bowed, saying, "Several adults have come from afar. The governor of Ezhou and the officials of Ezhou are waiting here." The chief censor smiled and walked forward, saying, "Master Yu is too polite. Let's go into the city to talk." The governor of Ezhou looked at him and said in surprise, "It turned out that it was Master Qi who came to Jiangnan this time. We haven't seen each other for a long time." The governor of Ezhou and the chief censor obviously knew each other. The chief censor, who was used to bowing his head along the way, finally straightened his body this time and looked at Tang Ning with a warning look. Tang Ning didn't care about it. He didn't plan to stay in Ezhou for a long time. He would set off again in 2 days at most. After all, the examinations of officials in Ezhou can be delayed, but the matter of treason and rebellion cannot be delayed for a moment. Of course, if there is no accident. After entering the city, the group was arranged at the post station. Inside the post station, Tang Ning was resting in his room. In another secluded wing room, the governor of Ezhu looked at the chief censor and wondered, why is it Brother Chi who came this time? The censorate is making a fuss. Is there something wrong? Brother, you guessed right. The chief censor looked at him with a solemn expression and said, the candidates for the examination in Jiangnan this time are different from the past. They keep changing. Your Majesty must have some thoughts about Jiangnan. We have to be on guard. The governor of Ezhu looked at him suspiciously. Is there something fishy about the candidates sent by the Ministry of Personnel this time? This person is not easy to deal with, the chief censor said with a gloomy face. Even I have been suppressed by him all the way. I am afraid he really wants to stir up some trouble in Jiangnan. Are there not many people who want to stir up trouble in Jiangnan? The governor of Ezhu looked at him, curled his lips, and said sinisterly, since he has bad intentions, we might as well strike first. Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 559. Remember it in 1 second and read wonderful novels for free without pop-ups. On the second day after arriving in Ezhu, Tang Ning sent out all the officials he brought with him. There are many types of assessments for the Ministry of Officials. Each of them is responsible for one, and the results will be available within 2 days at most. Afterwards, the final rating will be given based on the comprehensive investigation results of these people. The assessment results are divided into 3 levels and 9 levels, from top to top, top to middle, top to bottom to top, bottom to middle, bottom to bottom, a total of 9 levels. Those who are above are promoted or rewarded, and those who are below are dismissed or demoted. As far as the civil servants are concerned, as long as local officials do not make any major mistakes, they can all receive average or above average evaluations. Without rewards or punishments, the civil servants will be at ease. In the evaluation of Jiangnan states, there are very few people who fail. Even if they know that there are many tricks in some aspects, but considering many factors, the officials in the Ministry of Personnel will turn a blind eye. In terms of population, Ezhu is located in the south of the Yangtze River, with abundant products, no war, and no major fluctuations. The social security is also good. As for other minor items, there are no major mistakes. In the assessment of Jiangnan officials, the most important thing is naturally taxation. In addition to agricultural taxes, Ezhu also involves commercial taxes and mineral taxes. Especially the mining tax. Ezhu is rich in copper mines, and the mining tax accounts for a large part of the total tax revenue. As the last assessment item, Tang Ning sent 2 people to go. After arranging these, he walked out of the room and happened to see Yushi Zhongcheng. Tang Ning looked at him and said, Master Qi, remember to pack your things tonight. We will set off tomorrow. Censor Zhongcheng looked at him and asked in surprise, where are you going? Tang Ning glanced at him and said, of course I'm going to the next state. Isn't 2 days enough for Lord Qi and Governor Yu to reminisce about the past? There are many prefectures like Ezhu in the south of the Yangtze River. If he delays each one for 2 days, when will he be able to see, when will he be able to find those rebels? Censor Zhongcheng looked at him with suspicion on his face. Tang Ning's performance in Ezhu was so calm that he found it incredible. I thought he would seize the opportunity of Ezhu and make a big fuss, but he did nothing. He also let go of some obvious problems. In previous years, he might not have thought too much about it, but this time His Majesty changed the candidates for Jiangnan many times, and he chose Tang Ning. If he said that he came to Jiangnan for no other purpose, he would not believe it even to death. And his real purpose is not difficult to guess. Although Jiangnan was rich and provided a large amount of tax money to the court, this was only relative. The vast majority of the silver still flowed into the hands of the wealthy families and gentry in Jiangnan. The court had been thinking about this money for a long time. I understand. He looked at Tang Ning, feeling wary secretly in his heart, and turned around and left the inn. A moment later, the governor's mansion. Governor Yu looked at him and asked in surprise, "He is leaving tomorrow." "Believe him and you'll be doomed." Yashi Zhongcheng sneered and said, "He just wants you to relax your vigilance. I'm afraid he has already started to act secretly." A look of surprise appeared on Governor Yu's face and he said, "So that's it? The 2 men he sent have already gone to the copper mine." Censor Zhongcheng looked at him and asked, "Is there a problem with the copper mine?" Governor Yu smiled and said, "How could there be a problem with the copper mine? Anyone who says there is a problem with the copper mine has ulterior motives. Over the years, these people with ulterior motives have never had a good end. Your Majesty, my subordinates and Wang Zhang went to the official treasury today." Tang Ning was packing her things in the room while listening to a report from a certain palmist. Tang Ning looked at him and asked casually, "Is there a problem with business tax?" "These are all old problems." The clerk nodded and said awkwardly, "The wealthy gentry engaged in business in Jiangnan colluded with the government to conceal half of the goods, so that they only had to pay half of the business tax. They have been like this all year round. If the imperial court wants to impose a forced conscription, the officials sent here will not end well." In fact, Tang Ning had heard about these things when she was in the Ministry of Household Affairs. Jiangnan had the support of many ministers in the court and made a big fuss about taxation, which could be called rampant. In recent years, there have been natural disasters and wars, and the national treasury was empty. Chen Huangman's heart is full of money, but these wealthy gentry in Jiangnan are all extremely rich. However, in Tang Ning's view, this was just because the court's methods were not tough enough. Any wealthy family or any noble family is not worth mentioning in front of the state machinery. It is just that the court is unwilling to pay the price of chaos in the court. Jiangnan has close ties with certain officials in the court, and one move can affect the whole body. Once there is chaos, there will be no so easy to settle down. Naturally, he didn't want to provoke anything that even Chen Huang didn't want to do. After listening to what Zhang Gu said, he just waved his hand and said, "Go pack your things and set off tomorrow." Zhang Gu was immediately relieved. He had also heard about Master Tang's reputation, and was worried that he would be stubborn and try to get involved in Jiangnan's affairs, which would cause misfortune and implicate them. Unexpectedly, he actually knew the seriousness. It seemed that they were going to the journey down should not be too tiring. After all, a strong dragon cannot defeat a local snake. In this Jiangnan, it is better for them to be honest and careful. Tang Ning packed her things and was about to go out to see the scenery in Ezhu. Suddenly, a clerk ran in from outside the door and said in panic, "Master Tang, it's not good, something happened to Su Zhangwu." Su Zhangwu was one of the 2 minor officials sent by Tang Ning to check the mining taxation in Ezhu. He was fine when he left, but now he was lying on the bed, unconscious. Although his head was wrapped in gauze, it still oozed a trace of blood. Tang Ning looked at the other person beside the bed with a gloomy face and asked, "What happened?" The clerk who went with him said in a panic, "My lord, when I and Su Zhangwu came back from the mine, a rock suddenly fell from the mountain and hit Su Zhangwu." A white-bearded old man beside the bed withdrew his fingers from Su Zhangwu's wrist, shook his head and said, "I have already given him acupuncture. If he can wake up at this time tomorrow, then there will be no problem. If he can't wake up at this time tomorrow, maybe he will never wake up." After the doctor left, Tang Ning looked at the clerk and asked, "Is there a problem with the copper mine?" The clerk gritted his teeth and said, "My lord, Ezhu has been withholding and concealing mining taxes for many years, and the Ministry of Personnel has always turned a blind eye to this. This time they took action against Su Zhangwu, which must be a warning to us." As soon as he finished speaking, another voice came from outside. The governor of Ezhu came in from outside and asked with concern, I heard that an adult was injured. How is the situation? Tang Ning said calmly, whether his life is in danger or not, we will know tomorrow. Why are you so careless? Governor Yu sighed with some regret, looked at Tang Ning again, and said, I heard that Mr. Tang will leave tomorrow. It's a pity. I want to do my best to be a host for a few more days. Since Mr. Yu is so enthusiastic. Tang Ning looked at him and said with a smile, then I will stay for a few more days. The expression on Governor Yu's face froze. After a moment, he laughed twice and said, although I also want to keep Mr. Tang for a few more days, the official business of the court cannot be delayed. Mr. Tang can leave with peace of mind. This adult will stay in Ezhu to recuperate. Tang Ning shook his head and said, Mr. Yu's sincerity, I can't let him down. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 560. The expression on the Ezhu governor's face turned into a smile, and he looked at Tang Ning and asked, won't this delay the official's errands? No. Tang Ning smiled and said, I just remembered that there are still some things that I have not done in Ezhu, so I will leave 2 or 3 days more time. If I don't delay anything, I won't be unwelcome to you, sir. No, no, how could it be possible? Governor Yu waved his hand and said, I still have some things to do here, so I won't disturb Mr. Tang. Tang Ning nodded and said, good luck, Mr. Yu. When Governor Yu walked out of the post station, his face turned completely gloomy. He walked to Yishi Zhongchen's residence, knocked on the door, and strode in. Yishi Zhongchen was packing his luggage. When he saw him coming in, he said, maybe I thought wrongly. He seems to be really leaving. Why are we going? Governor Yu said with a serious look on his face, he just said that he would stay in Ezhu for a few more days. As expected, Yishi Zhongchen put down the luggage in his hand and said, my guess is absolutely correct. This person is as cunning as a fox and pretends to leave. Let us relax our vigilance and finally reveal the fox's tail before leaving. Governor Yu said coldly, whether he is a fox or a tiger, if he wants to stir up trouble in Ezhu, I will kill him and sell him as his skin. Censor Zhongchen looked at him and reminded, don't act rashly. He has the Shangfang sword given by His Majesty himself. He can kill unruly people and punish corrupt officials. Be careful. Sword of Shangfang, Yu Sishi said disdainfully, this is Ezhu, not the capital. Even if he has the sword of Shangfang, I have to give him a chance to pull it out. Censor Zhongchen looked at him and asked, what do you mean? A hint of murderous intent flashed in the eyes of the governor, and he said, Jiangnan is not as good as the capital. These officials in the capital are delicate and can easily become acclimatized when they get here. In the past few years, the officials in the capital who died in Jiangnan have died because they could not adapt to the climate in Jiangnan. There are 8 instead of 10. Censor Zhongchen gave him a very meaningful look and said, if he died in Ezhu, Tang Shangshu, Tang Huifei, and His Highness Prince Duan would all be grateful to Brother Yu. In another room of the inn, all the officials from the official department who had traveled to Jiangnan were gathered together. After the doctor left for an hour, Su Zhang woke up and was out of danger. Tang Ning stood beside the bed, looked at him, and asked, how do you feel? Su Zhang leaned on the head of the bed, supported his head, and said, my head just hurts a little, but everything else is fine. He looked at Tang Ning and said, Master Tang, I'm really sorry. Because Xiaoguan has delayed his schedule, why don't you, Master Tang and all your colleagues go ahead, and Xiaoguan will catch up to you in a few days. Tang Ning waved her hand and said, no, we have to stay here for a few days. At the very least, we need to get this debt back. A clerk seemed to have thought of something, his expression changed, and he said, "Sir, you must not." Tang Ning looked at him and asked, "Why not?" "I know that your excellency wants to avenge Su Zhangwu." The junior official looked at him and said, "But this is Ezhu, and it is their territory. The capital officials are in the south of the Yangtze River and have no support. They cannot fight against them." Su Zhangwu also realized the meaning of Tang Ning's words just now. He felt warm in his heart and said with a look of emotion on his face, "Sir, it's okay for my subordinates. Your safety is important. I've been bullied, what if I don't go back?" Tang Ning looked at him and asked, "Don't you know what my colleagues in Beijing said about me? Everyone in the capital does not know the name of the Broom Star. Not only do they know that Mr. Tang is the Broom Star, they also know that he is petty and careless. Anyone who has not offended him must be extremely careful, and those who have offended him are even more careful. One ends well. Before today, when everyone thought of his stinginess and carelessness, they could only feel amusement and contempt. When they experienced his carelessness personally, all they felt in their hearts was emotion and ignited passion. Officials in the Ministry of Civil Affairs were bullied in Jiangnan, and countless people were injured or even killed. But did they ever have a superior who stood up for them? Not even one. There is no one who wants to fight the local government to the end just because his subordinates are injured. Su Zhanggu's eyes were moist and he choked with sobs. "Master Tang." Tang Ning waved her hand to stop him from continuing and said, "You should recover well and leave the rest to us." Tang Ning didn't think he was a meddlesome person. In fact, he had no intention of getting involved in Jiangnan's affairs. Whether Ezhu officials are greedy for mining taxes or cheating on commercial taxes, the money they lose is the court. Even the court turns a blind eye, so he doesn't have to care. But he admitted that he was stingy. There was only a wrong name, not a wrong nickname. His titles of Broom Star and Cheapskate did not appear out of thin air. The Ezhu officials were just being honest. He could pretend he didn't see some things, but since they took the initiative to provoke them, if he left without saying a word, he would feel like a lost dog who left in despair. After Tang Ning left, the room fell into silence. At a certain moment, a minor official raised his head and asked, "Master Tang wants to fight these people to the end. What should we do?" "What else can we do?" One person blushed and said, "Follow Mr. Tang and hum them." There was a hint of hesitation on the man's face and he said, "But this is Ezhu, not the capital." "Ezhu, what's wrong with Ezhu?" someone said with a sarcastic look on his face. "Can Ezhu compare with the capital? Are the local officials of Ezhu as cunning as the old foxes of the capital? Even the people in the capital can't defeat Mr. Tang, let alone talk about some little local officials." "You're right, do they really think they are vegetarians? Think about it, has Master Tang ever been defeated since he entered the court? Master Su's revenge must be avenged." Not long after Tang Ning returned to her room, there was a knock on the door. He turned around and saw several junior officials coming in. Everyone bowed their hands to him and said, "Master Tang." Tang Ning looked at them and asked, "What's wrong with you?" A junior official said with a solemn expression, "We know that Mr. Tang will fight these people in Ezhu to the end, so we came here to remind Mr. Tang." Another person said, "There has always been a shortage of tax revenue in Jiangnan. This is a chronic problem of the imperial court. Officials who have gone to Jiangnan to investigate over the years have either been roped in or have encountered mishaps. More people simply do not dare to interfere in Jiangnan affairs. Your Excellency, if you confront them this time, you will definitely receive their revenge." Tang Ning smiled and asked, "How to take revenge?" A junior official said, "A former examination doctor of the Ministry of Civil Affairs went to Ezhu to investigate the mining tax. He encountered a bandit on the way and was killed. 2 years ago, there was a censor who, not long after he came to Jiangnan, was killed by the water and soil. He refused to obey and fell seriously ill and died. Just the day before, he attended a banquet hosted by the local government. This must be their fault. Mr. Tang must be careful. Tang Ning nodded and said, I understand. The clerk looked at him and said, no matter what happens, we will stand with Mr. Tang. Some officials in the south of the Yangtze River thought that they were far away from the capital and were indeed acting unscrupulously. Secretly murdering court officials, such things happened many times, but the court did not pursue them vigorously. This shows how far-reaching the influence of the Jiangnan faction in the court has been. Of course, this is unavoidable. After all, the imperial court uses the imperial examination to select officials, and Jiangnan candidates have always outperformed other state capitals, and even the Jiangxi region has been suppressed by them. In the long run, even if the imperial court is not controlled by the Jiangnan faction, the Jiangnan faction will continue to dominate. The influence of North Korea and China cannot be underestimated. However, for Tang Ning, he hoped that the other party would be simple and straightforward, and fight with real swords and guns. He came here to suppress the rebellion, and Shang Fang's sword was not stained with blood. When he returned home, Chen Huang thought he was paddling. Ezhu officials did not disappoint him. Tang Ning received an invitation that afternoon. An invitation from an Ezhu official inviting him to a banquet tomorrow night. This chapter is first published like Have Voice Novel Network, please remember the URL. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 561. Chapter 558, Attending a Banquet in the main text volume of Ruyi Xiaolang Jun. In ancient times, Xiang Yu hosted a banquet for Liu Bang and held a hangmen banquet with the intention of assassinating him. Now, some officials from Ezhu have evil intentions and have invited Tang Ning to a banquet at Yuan Yang House. Maybe as soon as Tang Ning sat down, 300 swordsmen and axe-wielders rushed in from the next room. Su Zhang looked anxious and said, Sir, this is a trap, you can't go. Tang Ning put the invitation aside and said to a clerk, tell Governor Yu that I will be here tomorrow night as promised. When Su Zhang was about to speak, Tang Ning stretched out her hand to stop him from continuing. The hangmen banquet is a hangmen banquet, but it is not necessarily whose hangmen banquet belongs to it, and those who attend the banquet may not necessarily be the losers. In fact, at the hangmen banquet, the one who laughs last is not the overlord of Western Chu who hosted the banquet. Chen Zhou walked in from outside and asked, Sir, are you going to a banquet tomorrow night? Tang Ning nodded and said, if someone invites you kindly, it's natural to go. This is etiquette. Chen Zhou thought for a moment and said, go down and call Lu Tong. With Chen Zhou by his side, he could handle some things properly without Tang Ning taking the initiative to give them orders. Lu Tong is the captain of the Sharp Blade. He was originally a captain in Zhou Xiaoyi. Later, after being selected, he stood out from 5,000 people and passed many tests to become the leader of the Sharp Blade. Although he is not as clever as Chen Zhou, nor does he have Chen Zhou's craftsmanship, he has excellent professional skills and certain leadership abilities, and is qualified to be the captain of Sharp Blade. Of course, there are advantages and disadvantages. His biggest disadvantage is that his eyesight is a little bit worse. If he had a little eyesight, he should be training in the capital with the Blade members now, instead of coming all the way to Jiangnan to meet these local officials. A battle of wits and courage. Not long after, Chen Zhou walked in with someone else. Captain Lu Tong looked at Tang Ning and asked impatiently, General, do you have a new mission? Is it an overt killing or an assassination? Where is the location and when will you start? Tang Ning said, tomorrow night, Yuan Yang Tower, you will obey my orders. Everything needs a name. Tang Ning could just bring out Shang Fang's sword and take down the officials involved in Ezhu, but if this name is unjust and unreasonable, they may not be convinced. There was no such thing as a good feast, so Tang Ning hoped that those people would show their fangs first, so that it would be natural for them to take action. Lu Tong looked at him and asked, "What's the order?" "The time to take action must be chosen well. The ambush person does not know what is going on inside, so he needs an agreed upon signal." Tang Ning thought for a while and said, "Let's break the cup as a sign. When you hear the sound of the cup being thrown, rush in from the outside and capture them all." Lu Tong stood up straight and shouted loudly, "Take the order." Governor's mansion. Censor Zhong Chen walked slowly into a certain room, looked at Governor Yu, and said, "Are you planning to take action tonight?" "Tonight is his last chance." Governor Yu took a sip of tea and said, "It depends on his choice whether he lives or dies." Censor Zhong Chen continued, "What are you going to do?" Governor Yu took out a red porcelain vase from the drawer. The porcelain vase was only about the size of a thumb and was entirely red with some strange patterns on it. The censor Zhong Chen asked in surprise, "What is this?" Yu Sishi said, "The best poison in the world." Censor Zhong Chen looked at him and asked suspiciously, "Is it useful?" Yu Sishi said, 2 years ago, the censor in your censorship died like this." Yushi Zhong Chen suddenly said, 2 years ago, Yushi Zheng went to the south of the Yangtze River. He said that he was not accustomed to the acclimatization and died of a sudden illness. "So it was you who did it?" Governor Yu put the porcelain bottle in his hand, played with it, and said, "There is no cure for this poison. Just a few drops can completely kill it." Yushi Zhongcheng said, "He is different from Yushi Zheng. He is a favorite of the emperor. Such a blatant attack has angered his majesty. None of you can escape." Yu Sishi smiled and said nonchalantly, "This poison does not seal the throat when blood is seen. As long as the dosage is controlled, there will be no symptoms in the early stage of poisoning. After a few days, the internal organs will begin to fester, and then he will start to vomit blood. It is difficult to eat, difficult to breathe, and after several days of torture, he will die completely." Censor Zongchen's eyes flickered a few times and said, "That's very good. If I can deal with this person, I will definitely take credit from Mr. Tang when I return to the capital." Governor Yu cupped his hands and said, "Then I'll thank Brother Qi first. I remember clearly that Zhen Yushi was fine for the first 2 days after leaving Ezhu. 2 days later, he suddenly fell ill. He could not eat or sleep peacefully. He just gasped for air and soon began to vomit blood. After suffering for 7 days, he died of illness on the way." When a junior official in the Ministry of Personnel talked about the death of Zhen Yushi, his face still looked horrified and his face was extremely pale. After hearing what the young official said, Gong Sun Ying's face was as dark as water, and he said, "King Qian has been in Jiangnan for so many years, and he has indeed colluded with Jiangnan officials." Tang Ning looked at him and asked, "Did King Qian do this?" Gong Sun Ying said, "This matter may not necessarily be done by the king of Gizhu, but the Ezhu officials must have colluded with the king of Gizhu. Otherwise, where did they get this?" All things withered. Tang Ning asked, "Is everything dry?" Gong Sun Ying explained, "It is a strange poison of our Wangu section. There is no antidote for this poison. Those who are poisoned by this poison will not have any symptoms in the early stage, but after 1 or 2 days, their internal organs will rot and they will vomit blood and die. This process is extremely painful and can last up to half a month." Gong Sun Ying's "all things wither" is the same as the symptoms of poisoning by a certain synthetic poison in the later generations that Tang Ning knew. Even in the later generations with advanced medicine, the mortality rate of taking that poison is more than 90%. Even a very small amount is enough to kill people. The similarity between the two poisons is that the poisoned person will not die immediately. Even if he regrets it, he can only watch himself go to death. More importantly, this process will be very painful. It is better to commit suicide than to wait for death. Ezhu officials used this to murder Zhen Yushi and used the reason of uncomfortable with the local climate and water to cover up the truth. They can use it once and then use it again. Tang Ning breathed a sigh of relief. The more despicable their means, the less psychological pressure he had to do certain things. Yuanianglu is the largest and most luxurious restaurant in Ezhu City. Local dignitaries like to entertain guests here. Today, the business of Yuanianglu is still booming. When a group of people walked in from outside, there was a burst of surprised sounds in the hall. It's Yushi. Ma Bijia is here too. And Kuichenchi, who are you entertaining? Why are all these dignitaries here? All the people who walked in were local officials in Ezhu. It was rare to see one of them on weekdays. This time, everyone came out together, which meant that tonight's banquet was very important. I don't know which great god was invited. The shopkeeper of Yuanianglu came up in person and said with a smile on his face, "Sir, the private room upstairs is ready, please follow me." Everyone entered the private room, and the doors of the private rooms on both sides opened a gap. Several members of the sharp blade pressed their heads against the wall, and the rest of the people had already prepared to enter the palace. Lu Tong looked at them and whispered, "The general said that breaking the cup is a signal. If you hear the sound of breaking cups, report it immediately."